Welcome to the Plato Paradigm, a paradigm shift in reading Plato's dialogues. Episode 256, Lysis Conclusions. Lysis is traditionally regarded as a dialogue on philia, friendship. We can understand why people might have this impression. Socrates spends most of the conversation talking about philia with two boys, Menexenus and Lysis, who, as Socrates points out, are supposed to be best friends. If indeed the dialogue is about philia, we would have to conclude that eros, lust, is a form of friendship. I say this because the whole dialogue is framed as if it is a lesson Socrates gives to a young man called Hippothales, who is lusting after Lysis. Before we go on, I should say that I'm using the English word lust to translate eros, but we need to understand lust here as a sort of obsessive attraction to someone, not necessarily a complete sexual relationship with the lust object. Definitely in this case, Lysis has absolutely no interest in Hippothales. Nothing is going on from his point of view. But Hippothales is described as completely obsessed with Lysis, and he's making even his own peers sick of it. He keeps mentioning the name Lysis. He makes up songs, verses in praise of Lysis and his family, and seems not to have a life outside of anything to do with Lysis. The strange thing about Hippothales in this dialogue about philia is that all references to Hippothales occur outside of the conversation about philia, or between the arguments. Suddenly we get a reference to Hippothales. It's almost as if Socrates is telling the Hippothales story to someone who wouldn't necessarily be all that interested in philia, but will listen to the conversation about philia because of the erotic framing. The story about Hippothales, in a way, eroticizes the conversation about philia. We need to understand that Socrates is narrating this whole dialogue. And the question then becomes, who is the audience? It's often assumed that when Socrates narrates an entire dialogue, he's talking to us. Or, even worse, Plato is talking to us through Socrates. However, since Socrates is the one doing the talking and he doesn't know that we exist, we may assume that he is talking to someone whom we do not know. But we can deduce a few things. Socrates is talking to someone who never interrupts. Socrates is saying what he says because it is of interest to the audience. What is evidently of interest to the audience is eros, specifically in the form of a roughly 16-year-old boy having an obsession about a roughly 12-year-old boy. What is of interest to us is how Socrates exploits his audience's interest in this form of eros to talk about philia, which we may then deduce is not like eros. It is different from eros. Let's see how Socrates hooks the interest of the audience and then how he maintains this interest despite the conversation being about philia. Let's leave all the suspicious scene setting for now, the walk from academy to lyceum, apparently by accident meeting the 16-year-olds outside the palaestra, the wrestling school, and the apparent fact that Socrates didn't know that his friend Mikkos had a palaestra there, let alone was having an open day, a ceremony for the Hermaia, the festival for Hermes, on that day. For now, let us note that Socrates knows these people. He immediately names Hippothales and his friend Ctesippus. And let's jump straight to the part where Socrates realizes that Hippothales is madly in love with a boy in the palaestra. Socrates doesn't merely report the fact, but almost dramatizes it in speech. He gives a verbatim conversation between himself and Hippothales, and then with Ctesippus, who makes fun of Hippothales. All of this, we might have thought, would be redundant in a philosophical dialogue. Even as scene setting, this seems to be a bit too much. But this sort of gossipy narrative is ideal for hooking an audience who is equally obsessed with eros. It soon becomes clear that Hippothales doesn't know how to court a young boy. He praises his family, praises his wealth, his history, the family background, but he doesn't actually know very much about Lysis himself, and it does look as though he doesn't even talk to Lysis. He seems to be more of a stalker. Interestingly, Socrates doesn't tell him to stop being obsessive. Instead, he says that Hippothales is going about courting the boy in the wrong way. He shouldn't be puffing the boy up with all these ideas of greatness. Given that obsession is not a philosophically ideal state of being, it is astonishing that Socrates doesn't stop Hippothales, doesn't criticize Hippothales in that way, but actually suggests helping him. He can give a demonstration of how to talk to Lysis. With the help of Ctesippus, Hippothales' friend, they come up with a plan, and they end up in the changing room of the palaestra with Socrates and Ctesippus sitting on a bench and Hippothales hiding among the bystanders, the other friends who are all there eager to look at Lysis and Menexenus. Ctesippus knows that he can attract Menexenus, his cousin, and then they know that Lysis will be encouraged to come over because he's a friend of Menexenus. And this is what happens. Menexenus and Lysis sit between Ctesippus and Socrates, and Hippothales listens to the entire conversation. This is how Socrates will demonstrate to Hippothales how to talk to Lysis. All of these machinations are slightly underhand and not very philosophical, but it is a very effective way to hook someone who actually likes erotic intrigue. Now that the audience is hooked, Socrates can start talking about philia, which he does first with Lysis. Menexenus is called out of the changing room to perform some ritual, and Socrates talks with Lysis about something extremely boring. It has nothing to do with eros. Lysis at the beginning of the conversation was not conceited, but Socrates steers the conversation in such a way that Lysis appears to be a complete megalomaniac. But by the end of the conversation, he has Lysis agree that he knows nothing and doesn't have any reason to be big-headed, at which point Socrates says that he almost forgot not to give Hippothales away. He was almost about to turn to Hippothales and say, look, this is how you talk to your beloved. The only purpose served by referring to Hippothales here in such a gratuitous way is to maintain the interest of the unknown audience. They will now think that this argument really does have something to do with how to talk to one's beloved. Menexenus returns, and the next argument is completely different and shows that friendship is neither active nor passive and is not a relationship of one regardless of the other or a mutual relationship. It's this point which gets Lysis to come back into the conversation. He blushes as he objects to the line of questioning. The fact that he blushes is added simply to maintain the interest of the unknown audience. And then after a few more arguments, we come to yet another gratuitous conclusion. The argument here is that we like what is proper to us. For example, the body likes the arm because the arm is proper to the body. It is part of it. It is organic. And then Socrates suggests that Menexenus and Lysis are organic to each other, which allows him to confuse the part which is organic to the host. And this allows him to say that the eros is organic to the eromenos. The luster is organic to the lust object, and the lust object therefore needs to love the eros. This is total nonsense, but it allows the audience to think that we have finally come to the main point of the whole conversation, which is to get the loved one, the beloved boy, to love the eros. In the meantime, the unknown audience has been exposed to all of this conversation about philia.